update on the latest on the invasion of Ukraine. Our correspondent in Russia, Chapman, joins us now live. Julia, tell us where you are and what exactly the streets of Moscow are like this morning.
I'm actually in the southern city of Rostov-on-Don, about 125 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, where an offensive is continuing by the Russian military. But it isn't limited to the eastern Ukrainian regions known as the Donbass. They have been carrying out strikes on targets all around the country, and a strong offensive in particular this morning is taking place in Kiev, with Russian land troops moving closer to the peripheries of the city and a number of airstrikes being carried out. The Ministry of Defense says that it is only targeting military infrastructure in parts of Ukraine, but that has not proven to be true. We know that some residential buildings have been hit and there are some civilian casualties. We also understand that Russian troops have taken control of the Chernobyl nuclear plant, which of course melted down in 1986. And we understand that the people working there, preserving it, keeping it safe, the nuclear waste, have been taken hostage by the Russian army. Certainly this offensive continues as officials here in Russia are trying to justify what is happening in Ukraine in recent days. They say that these actions were necessary because it is necessary to demilitarize Ukraine. But it's becoming very apparent that they are not just trying to offer separatists independence in eastern Ukraine. They are trying to take control of the entire country. And officials in Kiev are expecting a tank offensive on the capital in the coming hours.
Well, Putin has said here for the United States and its allies, it's a policy of containing Russia with obvious geopolitical dividends. For our country, it's a matter of life and death, a matter of our historical future as a nation. He seems very set on moving forward with this invasion at whatever cost.
He does indeed. The threats of sanctions, the announcement of fresh sanctions yesterday does not appear to have stopped President Vladimir Putin on this effort that he is making, apparently, to take control of Ukraine. There were widespread sanctions introduced yesterday targeting Russian banks, Russian officials, among other areas. The national flag carrier Aeroflot has now been banned in the UK, and officials in Moscow are warning that they will introduce counter-sanctions. They say all of these measures will be met reciprocally, but undoubtedly they have not seemed to have any impact on the fighting that is going on the ground. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine said this morning in an address to the Ukrainian people that sanctions didn't appear to be having any kind of deterrent impact. Now, of course, Western nations will say that that may have always been expected. President Vladimir Putin will do whatever it is that he wants to do. He appears very determined to take control of Ukraine at whatever cost. But the Ukrainian army is fighting back. Ukrainian officials say that they have held off the land offensive in many areas. It isn't clear for how much longer they will be able to do that, because ultimately they are outmanned and outgunned by the Russian military.
Julia, the ordinary Russian on the street, what are their responses been to the invasion of Ukraine? Do they want it to happen? And is state media reporting in such a way that it seems justified?
They're trying to justify it in the state media, certainly. What we have been seeing on Russia's main 24-hour news channel isn't reports of bombings on cities like Kiev and Odessa. They are pretty much exclusively covering the events in eastern Ukraine, in the Donetsk and Luhansk republics that President Vladimir Putin announced as independent on Monday. But they are not getting the full picture of what is going on in Ukraine, what damage their government is doing to people there. But there is already a mixed reaction from people as to what they are seeing. We did see a few protests breaking out in Russian cities yesterday, thousands of people trying to come out onto the street to make their opposition heard, a very fraught endeavour in a country like Russia. We saw hundreds of people arrested yesterday, most of them in Moscow and St. Petersburg. So undoubtedly there is an anti-war effort, but it is very difficult to protest in this country without being thrown in prison. So those that do so are risking a lot. There are likely many more who would want to take to the streets if they felt it was safe to do so. And the extent to which the Russian government propaganda offensive is convincing the Russian people still remains unclear.
Julia, do you have any difficulties as a foreign correspondent reporting on this from Russia?
At the moment, no, they have not restricted our movements. I'm here in the city of Rostov-on-Don. There are a number of other journalists staying here. There are some restrictions, however, on reporting about military activity. It was announced earlier this year that there would be fines against any journalists that were speculating about military activity. Of course, we've all been having to speculate about what the Russian military is up to for many months now. We also heard yesterday that the Russian state media regulator will be issuing fines and bans potentially against news outlets that report anything other than MOD, Ministry of Defense lines, because they say that is the only verifiable information. Of course, that is going to be very difficult for most journalists to do. We are reporting both sides of this story. Likely, those targets, those measures will not be aimed at foreign media. It is the domestic media that has a much harder time in this country, although we have seen some foreign journalists expelled this year, have their accreditations taken away from them. So certainly the situation remains tense, but as things stand, there are no restrictions to our movements.
All right, thank you so much for crossing there to us, Julia. That was our Russian correspondent, Julia Chapman.